Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of SuperCoach, mates. Well, I am alive. I have found my webcam. It's good to be back seeing everyone again, although I'm not actually seeing everyone. As per normal, I am joined by Thomas. How are you going, Thomas?
Yeah, not too bad. Been a hectic couple of weeks with the tennis and whatnot, but good to be back. With the footy season starting up again, and yeah, pre-season games just around the corner. I believe the Vicks versus WA All Stars game I think next week, so it'd be good to have some
Yes, it
semblance
is.
of footy back. But yeah,
Yes, it is next week. So
yeah, so it
we'll
should be
see how
pretty
we
good.
go. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do part two of our players who we think could step up from sort of where they are into the next bracket. So like we did with our episode one of this, we're just going to go
Mm-hmm.
through a few players from each position and sort of give our thoughts on whether or not we think that they're capable of breaking out, and perhaps
Yeah.
even whether or not you should start with them or consider them for your sides
Mm-hmm.
for round one. So I'm going to hand over to Thomas now because he's got the list.
Yeah, so hopefully you'll be able to see this on your screen now, blank canvas. But yeah, I think I posted on Twitter about mid-Jan about the players we were looking at considering, and I guess these are kind of a little bit off field, maybe not as common as what you think, but yeah, some players are probably more common than others. But yeah, I guess the list of players are the players we believe are ready to step up into the next echelon of SuperCoach scoring and hopefully can bump your scoring up and potentially save you a little bit of money elsewhere when you're trying to get the big dogs in. So first off the bat, I'll probably have to type these players instead of scrolling them, is the none other than the West Coast guy, Tom McCarthy, who was a rookie player or SPP, whatever you want to call it, and he just dominated off the half-back line. From all reports, it seems, and I know Nathan showed me something off air a couple of weeks ago about McCarthy dominating not VFL preseason simulation, and that seems to have been the pretty common trend across preseason. What are your thoughts on this, Nathan? Because obviously we picked him up at 99,000 last year, so you could, absolutely do no wrong considering he was playing. But now he's skyrocketed to 500,000, so he's essentially a cheap premium. Averaged about 93 off that half back line, and now he's playing pure mid. Do you reckon that's better or worse, considering that West Coast midfield is nothing to write home about or bang home about, and now he's playing in the thick of it? Do you reckon that'll help his scoring at all, or do you like how his half back role was last year?
Well, right now, as we're recording this podcast, right now he's actually snuck into the third defensive spot on my classic side. I know last podcast we did this, and I think we spoke about him, and I said perhaps he was a bit too expensive. I still think he is probably a bit too expensive for my liking. But for those of you who missed the article, it was in Code Sports. It was on the 25th of January. And
Yes.
they basically said that Tom McCarthy was best on ground, playing as basically an inside midfielder for West Coast in their match simulation. And basically, they've described him as the missing link in that West Coast midfield. So, for me at this stage, he is in my side. Very shakily there.
Yeah.
Again, I will maintain and say that I think he's probably about 30K more expensive than what I would like.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he's one that I'm definitely going to watch over the match sim and the Community Shield games.
Yeah.
And if that role sticks and his scoring is very good, I think he will make his way into a lot of sides. So I think for me, he's probably on the watch list now, even though he's in my side currently. But yeah, I think if what they're saying in the newspapers is accurate, jump on at 500K because he will skyrocket.
Yeah, I think him playing in a mid role is going to definitely help him. I think Elliot Yeo back is going to potentially do wonders if Yeo is fully fit and can play some sort of midfield minutes, and I think that'll help both Harley Reid and McCarthy. McCarthy's a very, very clean ball user as well, so I think if he can get his tackle numbers up and his pressure points around the ground and be around the ball more often, probably has more impactful points rather than your clear half-back role. But he's in my side at the moment. I think I was trying to really bump him up to D3, similar to what Nathan said. So, yeah, I think he's both a yes for us pending any disasters in preseason. The next person in line that we have is, if I just bring up the name, is the St Kilda potential to be captain, Cal Wilkie. He's obviously, I can't pick him because he's not flex. There we go. He's going to be very poddish if you do. Average 92.5. Again, basically same price as McCarthy. Look, I'll probably say my 2 cents worth as a St Kilda supporter, but what are your thoughts, Nathan, without knowing what I'm about to say? Is there any well that you pick Wilkie, or is it kind of, do you go back to that idea of, he's going to be playing more of a one-on-one defensive role and we shouldn't pick him because of that as a key defender?
Well, I guess my thing with Wilkie is that he's averaged 92. Last 2024, he averaged 91. 2023, he averaged 94. So I don't know if this is his ceiling. I don't know if he's a player that's going to be capable of breaking that 100 average, which ideally, if you pay $500,000 for, you probably hoping that they at least get near that. I don't think 94 is going to cut it. It might be a good D6 at the end of the year, but I think there's better options at that price myself. That's probably an unbiased view, but I'd be interested to hear what the St Kilda Tragic has to say about Wilkie.
I think you pass, and I think purely, like, I'll have my reasons in a minute, but I think purely you want Naz and Sinks in your side, and 3 St Kilda defenders is a little bit overboard or overkill, even from a St Kilda Tragic like myself. But yeah, I think early days he might benefit, particularly from Naz going in full-time mid. There's been, I think I read a report from a preseason game that he's essentially splitting kick-ins with Sinclair. And Wilkie's always been kind of that number 3 kick-out behind Naz and Sinks, but with now Naz transitioning to a full-time mid role, I think Wilkie benefits from that and benefits his share of the kickings, which I think is really beneficial, because I think the reason why his ceiling peaked at where it did for the last 3 years, he was kind of third fiddle in regards to or third rung down in the kick-out category. And I think someone like Silvani probably helps him as well, because then Wilkie's, going to play more of that off his man intercept role that maybe an Alex Rance or someone used to do. So I think he's going to be more of that interceptor rather than have to really struggle as a number 2 tall behind a Dougal Howard or a Caminiti, and someone like Silvani really helps that. So I think, I think if you have the balls, Wilkie's not a bad pick. He's uber consistent, I'd say. And I think the kickouts will help him, but I think just because of the fact that you probably want to have Sinclair and Naz in, particularly with Sinclair probably dominating that half-back line now purely, I think Wilkie's probably a pass. But we'll move on to the next player of interest, which is going to be from the Essendon Bombers. Not Jordan Ridley, as what a lot of people thought we were going to put in, but Archie Roberts, which it'd be interesting to see what Nathan, how much you've actually seen of him play. I guess from my perspective, he's priced pretty cheaply. I mean, 83.7 is not the best average. But having said that, I think Essendon need a bounce back somehow, and I think the first beneficiary of that bounce back will be the half-back line. What are your thoughts, Nathan? Because I think from what I saw from the Bombers, there was a lot of ball being used through Roberts with his dash. He seems like a sort of a Blakey type without that kind of elongated running style. But yeah, I think for those of you, this is a bit of a caveat. We're not talking about Ridley in this podcast, but I think you should probably avoid Ridley for the reason that I think they're going to use Roberts and McGrath more through that half-back line for purely a speed sake rather than anything. What are your thoughts, Nath?
Roberts? I'm going to actually take things that they're on McGrath, because I actually read an article today and said that Essendon have potentially marked him as being a bit more up the ground, Andy McGrath. So if that's the case, I can see Archie Roberts just about being their main distributor off the half-back flank. Yeah. I guess with that type of player, though, they need to be good with their disposal efficiency. Not sure what Archie Roberts' disposal efficiencies
Efficiency, yeah.
like. So without saying too much, he'd be a watch list at this stage for me. And if he takes off over the JLT games and the match sim, he might be more consideration. But I don't think he's probably the worst player to have on your watch list. As a bit of a cheaper D3.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think, look, if you're strapped for cash, he's not the worst one in the world, doesn't have an early buy. And I think, Essendon have a lot to prove coming into this season. And I think he's going to be one of the main beneficiaries. But I guess if you're playing it safe, I'd say probably a pass because you just don't know what Essendon's best side looks like from a ball distribution point of view. But moving on to the next player is going to be Trent Rivers from the Melbourne Demons. He's an interesting one with the fact that, look, he did play some midfield time last season. Wasn't probably what we all expected. And I think that comes into the face of Miles Bergman. I was going to put Miles Bergman on this list to discuss, but we've already talked about him in previous episodes, I think, quite extensively. Rivers, I think, probably benefits a little bit more from the fact that Oliver and Petrarca are gone, but I think Pickett is the main beneficiary of that. Rivers, I think he did play that classic kind of sweeper role as a midfielder, so essentially get the ball and then deviate backwards into a half-back mid position. But what are your thoughts on Rivers? Because obviously the D's actually, like I was looking at their list the other day, and they actually don't look terrible from their trade perspectives. They've got Myercheck, they've got obviously Jack Steele and Giath as well, and we'll talk about Giath a little bit later. But yeah, Rivers, what are your thoughts? Because I have a feeling he might spend a lot more time in the mids than the defence, especially if Giath is now like that rebounding halfback.
Well, I'd be interested to see what Melbourne's midfield makeup is actually going to be this year, given that pretty much 2/3 or 2/4 of their main midfield, or pretty much half their main midfield, is out the door. So they're gonna have to regenerate through that midfield. My only worry with Rivers is that I feel like because of Pickett and Viney and there's a few other guys who I've heard, but I feel like he's going to be the more defensive one. So I think he will probably play that sweeper role, which is basically, basically just adding on to what Thomas said. It's basically the midfielder that starts defensive side of the ruck contest, and then basically if they win it, then they just get it out. If they lose it, then they become the number one, essentially the first defender, if you will, who's then going to push back behind the ball. So, again, I think if you're picking between him and Roberts, I'd probably go for Rivers just on exposed form. But I think probably watch list for me as well, and just see how they go. To be honest with you, I think for Roberts and Rivers to be viable options, they've got to average at least 95.
I think
if you think they can get to 95, then go for it. If not, I just don't think it's worth it myself. So I think he's probably on the watch list, and we'll see how it goes over the match sim and the community series.
Yeah, no, I do tend to agree with Nathan. I think, on one of the Facebook chats, group chats, one of the questions was raised about what you could probably consider a mid-price or in a cheap premium. I think, the Rivers mark is definitely, that's not a stepping stone. It's kind of, you want to get him and hope that he kind of bombs off, and then you get his price rise. And if it does eventually fuck up in the near future, you've got that assurity that you've made that 100K at least. So, Rivers, I think it's a very similar boat to Bergman, which we talked about last episode. And the fact that he's more that defensive style midfielder, that he's already shown that he probably doesn't score the absolute best. And it's not like the D's haven't got a plethora of midfielders that they've just brought into their mix, including like a Langford, a Steele, and a Pickett. So I think, he's probably a pass for me. But the other D's, man, that we just briefly spoke about in conversation with Rivers is Chungkyoth Jath, who obviously traded from the Hawks. Yeah, probably had a rough time at the Hawks last season, where it was pretty much their permanent sub in the majority of that back end of the games. But playing that half-back role probably, I would argue, takes that Rivers spot more so, and he looks very athletic, rebounding defender. Do you think this is a case of different clubs, same score, or do you think there is some sort of merit considering he's only, 358K?
Nah, I think he's a pass for me.
Yeah, it's fair enough.
I think the problem with him is his disposal's not the
Yeah.
greatest.
Yeah.
Which if you're paying $358,000 for that, I'd rather just go down to Kadeem Coleman and save
Yeah.
120K, who's a much better distributor. So
Yeah.
I can see his scores improving.
Mhm.
I definitely don't think his average will be 66 at the end of the season. I think it's probably going to be around that 80 mark, but probably not
Yeah.
enough for a top six. So ideally at 358K, you'd want that. So,
Yeah.
yeah, pass for me.
Yeah, no, I'd say a pass for me as well. I think, look, if he was averaging even a 75, 80, you'd be probably entertaining a little bit more. But yeah, 66
And
average. I know there were sub-affected games, but, I think that he plays that really electric kind of brand that doesn't really correlate to high Supercoach
and
scores.
and Finn O'Sullivan's 40K cheaper
Yeah, and he's playing a halfback
for
role.
North Melbourne. So I think that there's probably not any value in GF unless you think he's going to, as I said, average that sort of 90 to 95. It's
Yeah.
just not worth doing a mid-price risk.
Yeah. And I know we were going to talk about Bergman, but I think we're both in agreement that he was probably a void for now, unless he really shows in the preseason that his midfield role has spiked in scoring. But one that I'm interested to hear your thoughts in, and this is only someone I've sort of recently, is Nick Blakey. So obviously now the premium end of things, 548K, averaged just over 100, 101.4. What are your thoughts on Blakey? Because it seems from all reports from the Sydney camp that he's really impressing, and it seemed like there was an obvious shift. Maybe I don't know if it was last year or the year before that essentially, Jake Lloyd, who was one that was scoring so heavily in the Sydney backline with their kind of chip mark game style, has transitioned into that kind of slingshot footy that Blakey and McInerney thrive on, where they just get into their hands and run. Maybe Blakey's deficient, probably the one knock, his disposal efficiency going forward has really probably cost a few big scores. But is there merit in picking in Blakey at all? What are your thoughts on that one? Because obviously he will have the early buy as well, and say you've got Sinks and Naz to consider in that back line. Is that one too many buy players to deal with?
Yeah, I'm actually quite big on Blakey. I think Sydney are in for a bounce back year.
Yeah.
We saw how Collingwood finished off in 2024, and then how they started last year. Obviously, sort of fell in a heap towards the end of the season. But I wouldn't be surprised if Sydney start like a house on fire. And I think Blakey's going to be an integral part of that. So I don't think he's the worst pick. He's probably about 30K more expensive than what I would like. I think if he was around that sort of 5-10 mark, I think he'd probably just about be my third defender.
Yeah.
At this stage, just given the low ownership and the fact that I think Sydney are in for a big year, but I think, to be honest, I think I'd rather just pay the extra, basically 20K, and get Connor Rosie, who pretty much has the easiest draw to start the year. I think I'd feel more comfortable with Rosie, but I don't think Blakey's the worst pick. So if you want to point a difference, I think you could probably do worse than Blakey. But as I said, I think he's probably about 30 to 40K too expensive for my liking.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I tend to agree with you. I think the only caveat you're looking at is McCarthy's already 500K, and I guess we're only looking at his midfield sample size against a shit West Coast B side. So, I think paying 40K more for Blakey, who is a bit more proven in a role that isn't going to change anytime soon, I think is beneficial. But I guess you've got to weigh out the buy situation as well. That's 3 defenders out of your 6 and 3 premiums at that early in the stage of the season. So I think he could be one too many. I guess if you only started one of Sinclair and Naz, I would be much more of a bigger advocate. But I think his is really dependent on team structure. And I wouldn't be surprised if teams start to latch on Blakey as well, because he's so integral to their ball movement, bar Goulden. So that's what our defense line looks like, as those kind of new year, new me players that are ready to push up from where they were scoring to kind of the next echelon of Supercoach. team building. But moving into the mids now, we'll start off with a really unique one, I guess, is one that haven't heard about, but I think scored actually all right for the Suns when he did play. Now he's moved to Dons, where he probably gets a little bit more midfield time, and that's under the name of Braden Fiorini, if I can spell. There we go. No, not Setterfield. For God's sake.
I think he's a forward, isn't he?
No, he's a mid. I just can't spell. There we go. Braden Fiorini. 95.2, 1% of sides at the moment. Look, he's going to play, I think, pure midfield time. That's a given. Probably takes out Setterfield in that side, and I think he's an in and under kind of Dylan Shield-esque type that obviously Dylan Shield's not there anymore. But what are your thoughts, Nathan? Because he's one that, I can see where a lot of people go, I'm just going to pay essentially 200 or 150K less and get Parrish in. But Fiorini seems to be going under the radar a little bit. I think he probably feels a little bit more popular in AFL fantasy circles. I know his biggest knock on his footy was his disposal efficiency, but what are your thoughts on Fiorini as that kind of, I guess, that 500 to 550K range?
Well, I myself at this stage simply can't bring him in, and that's not a knock on him. That's already because I've already got Parrish and I've already got Dyson Sharp. And I think having three midfielders from the same club's probably a stretch.
Yeah.
I guess for me, it probably is that disposal efficiency. As a midfielder, pure midfielder, that 95 average probably has to jump to, I don't know, if you want the eighth midfielder last year averaged 114.5 and 10th was 113. So he sort of has to probably average around that 105, 110 mark to make the pick worthwhile. I just can't see him getting to that point because we're sort of, at that price, we're sort of talking, like a Tom Green or a Heaney, Max Holmes, Harry Sheasel. I don't know if he's quite at that echelon yet. So I think for me, he'd probably be a pass. But if he impresses over the preseason, I might consider him as a watch list player. But at this stage, for me, it's a pass.
Yeah, I'd say it's a pretty quick pass just because of the players around him more so than anything. I think he's more than capable of scoring pretty nicely. But yeah, as you said, there's Heaney, there's Goulden, there's a fair few good players around that list. I think there's better options out there.
And how much is 515? And you've got Jack Steele, who's 5K cheap. I think I'd prefer Jack Steele. So I think that's probably more a case for him of his competition as opposed to any knock on him.
Yeah. Good one, Nath. But moving on, another Destin player who's actually cheaper than 500K and has played since in the midfield in the current Bombers lineup is Sam Durham. Priced at 488K. Again, I think the automatic conversation will go, we can get Parrish for cheaper. Has played stints up as a key forward at times, just with his awkward height. I think they've swung him forward in games and kind of left the field open to him. Look, I don't know. He's an exciting player. I don't think that translates necessarily to solid SuperCoach scoring. He did average about 90. But what are your thoughts on Durham? Do you reckon he's good enough to take it to the next step SuperCoach-wise, or do you think it's more his role that's going to hinder him, if anything?
I think it's his role. I think for a midfielder, I think they have to be able to impact at both stoppage and in the forward. I don't know if Durham is quite that type of player. I think he's probably more an inside, tallish midfielder. So I think I'd rather Darcy Parrish or Jack Steele at that price. So I think for me it's a pass.
Yeah. No, it's fair enough. I'd say it's a pass as well, just purely based off other players around him, and I think the role is really going to hurt him. All right, so moving on swiftly to another midfielder if I can get this mouse working, goes to a Hawthorn player who actually really impressed me from an eye test point of view, and that's Josh Ward. He's one that really stepped it up and locked himself in mid-spot when Day went down. Unfortunately, for those of you who were going to pick Day, unfortunately, he's gone down again as well, so he won't be out. He'll be out for another half a year or so, and that opens up the door, I think, for Josh Ward to cement his spot. along the likes of, say, Newcomb and even a Connor Nash. But yeah, Ward just seemed very, very clean in passages. Still, 83.3 is not the best average. What are your thoughts on this one, Nate? Because, yeah, ranked 1% average. He was one that was always touted to break out potentially last year or this year. And is there any merit in picking him? Or again, we going back to that conversation about it, there's just too many good players cheaper than him at that point?
Well, there might be someone else who actually comes into consideration. I don't know if he's going to be in this. I don't know if he's actually going to be in this podcast, but he's a forward, so he might come up later on. But I think I'm probably going to pass on that for the same reason as Parrish. I just think that there's no reason to pick him at that sort of awkward price of 450k. I think Hayden Young is Hayden Young's 60k cheaper and probably has a much better role than Josh Ward. So pass for me. But as I said, if we talk about this other Hawthorn player, there might be perhaps a bit more consideration. But I think Josh Ward, he's a pass for me.
Yeah. No, I'd say he's a pass. I think if there wasn't Young and Parrish to consider, I think, you look at Ward quite carefully. But, yeah, I think there's just too much to ask for him. But moving on to another player who, I think every year just goes under the radar, realistically speaking, and then he gets injured and then everyone goes, why'd you pick him? Is Tim Taranto. So he actually scores very well when he's fit. If I can bring up his scoring quickly. Quickly bring up on my screen here. So it seems like that if you just look at his 2025 form, he did play 21 games. And his low score was only 60, which he hit once. And I think he hit a couple more, 67, 69 in round one. And he just had a patch where he did very well. What are your thoughts on Taranto? Because you'd hope that the Tigs would get jumped back up at some point. But is he one that, as soon as the Tigers get better, he starts getting tagged? I mean, Taranto's downside was always his kicking problems. And that's probably translated into scores that are less than 110. But what are your thoughts on Taranto? Because he's owned by about 1% of sides. He's a bit of a pod, but only averaged 98.4 in the end. I think that was the issue. Biggest issue being was his ceiling was a big problem.
Pass unless he becomes forward eligible. I think there's better options at that price. He's not the best ball user by foot, which I don't know if you can see there on the bottom of Thomas's screen there. There's the indicative point scoring effective kicks, I think, are 4 points. Ineffective kicks, I think, are 0. And if you turn it over or clang a kick, you lose 4 points. So, I think he'd probably be a pass unless he becomes forward eligible. Then I think you would probably strongly consider him just because of the dearth of forward options at that sort of higher price. But as a pure midfielder, it's a very easy pass for me.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably a pass. Yeah, you're right. I think if he does get somehow DPP eligibility, he becomes a bigger option because of his consistent scoring in that kind of 90-95 bracket. But I think he just doesn't cut it when you've got a lot of good options around that price. But there might be someone else who we talk about in the forward line that might steal points off him. So, I think it's a bit of a pass. Yeah, and the next one moving on is, the last one in our midfield category is Marcus Windhager. Again, I'll talk about him in a minute from a St Kilda perspective. But what are your thoughts, Nathan? He's one that I think essentially drove Jack Steele out of the club with regards to his midfield resurgence. He scored really nicely towards the end of the season. I guess with St Kilda's buy into DeConning, Silvani and Flanders and really beefing up that squad from a player perspective, do you reckon that will help Windhager? Or luckily he was, as a St Kilda supporter, he was, a traditional tagger at that and didn't get his own ball. Now he's being kind of unleashed a little bit to get his own ball and looks a lot like the Petrarca of Young. But what are your thoughts on Windhager as well?
Well, the fact that he has been a tagger in the past does concern me because if someone gets out of control, he's probably going to go back to that tagging role. So, No, I don't think I can pick him. I think it's probably the same camp as Josh Ward. I'd rather save the 60K and go down to Hayden Young, who's never going to tag someone and has a much better role. So,
Yeah.
I think, unfortunately, if he was just about any other club, I think I would probably consider it slightly more than what I am. But with St Kilda and Ross Lyon, as soon as someone gets off the leash, we know that he's going to go back to the tag, and Windhager's probably the first choice. So you probably don't want that as a 444K midfielder. So easy pass for me.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I don't have the balls even as a St Kilda supporter to pick him, but I think the genuine interest will be around where he plays because, I mean, maybe not necessarily where he plays because I think he'll play midfield, but you look at Flanders, that's a lock in the midfield. You look at Naz, it's a lock in the midfield, and then McRae probably doesn't play anywhere else, and then Windy is kind of your kind of third to fourth strung along with Max Hall, but it'll be interesting to see whether if opposition teams' best players do get off the chain a little bit, he becomes a traditional tagger. As you said, he does a very good job at it. But on the flip side, do we actually play a brand that doesn't really go back to a traditional tagger? Because it seemed like even though he used Windy as a tag, it was games we were getting pumped in anyway. It's very rare that his direct correlation to a tag heavily impacted the game, if that makes sense. So I think he's one to avoid, but one that I think will be a bit of a watch to see if you can explode a little bit in that midfield with good ball suppliers around him like a Flanders and a McRae and really kind of nullified that sense of being picked again as a tagger. But we'll wait and see. But I guess moving on to someone that Nathan's picked his own classic side, which surprised me when I saw the photo because I thought surely not. But he's reverted to St Kilda and if I can bloody get this. Yeah. Tom De Koning, I'll let you take it away, Nathan, because you've actually picked him. I haven't got the balls to pick him for probably obvious reasons. He is owned by 11% of teams, so there's that to fall your hat on. But average 96.9. That was after he set the house on fire with his amazing kind of first 6-7 weeks, then slowed down and had a bit of time off. What are your thoughts on De Koning? Because I guess you're paying quite a cheap price for him at $5.24 compared to, say, a Sherry and a Gawn. But why did you pick him, Nathan, considering that you're a staunch Collingwood man? It'd be surprising that you actually went down the St Kilda route.
I just think he's going to be probably just about the biggest beneficiary from these new ruck rules.
Mm-hmm.
I think for someone like De Koning, who is a jumper, these ruck rules are a match made in heaven for him. And with Rowan Marshall probably playing more forward, I think he probably is St Kilda's number one ruckman. We saw what he did at Carlton in the first half of last year before I would say for all intents and purposes, he basically knew he was walking out the door, so he stopped trying, which probably contributed to that second half of the season's form slump. But, I'm happy to take the risk at this stage on him at 524,000. Whether or not he's there in round one is to be determined. But at this stage, I feel like a lot of people are perhaps looking at the new ruck rules and saying, well, I think De Koning's a big beneficiary of that.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be sort of where I'm coming from with De Koning. But, if there's another option that sort of proves himself that's a bit more, how do I word this? A bit more with a proven track record. I would probably jump up to them. But at this stage, De Koning just fits in with the rest of the side. So, I guess, Thomas, you'll probably know more about De Koning than what I do. But, at this stage, he's my second ruckman.
Yeah, I haven't picked him purely based on honest. I was keen on him, but I guess with the split, I mean, if Rowan Marshall went to the Cats, 100% you'd get De Koning. You'd be crazy not to with the new ruck rule. But I did hear, as Nathan rightly put, so that half the reason why Ross Lyon was desperately keen on him was that ruck rule beneficiary, and I think we're going to see the best out of De Koning with that ruck rule in place, as with English, as with Jackson, probably. Yeah, the split probably concerns me a little bit. Look. who knows? It's so hard to say how it's going to work, particularly if Max King is fit and ready to go round. Well, not fit, but plays round 1 or round 0. Because all 3 of them will be definitely interesting. Who knows if, because of how mobile King can be, do they put King as a true centre forward, Nick Riewoldt-esque, roaming up and down the ground as that kind of crash the bash kind of thing, and then put Ryan Marshall deep full forward, rotate him into Conning. Like, I don't know. De Conning's probably worse of a forward than Marshall is, so you'd probably say De Conning is your main ruckman. And then Rowe gets a chop out. But Ryan Marshall's a great ruckman in his own right and does arguably when St Kilda played Carlton last season, I think outshone De Conning around the ground. Right, like tap-wise, De Conning had him covered. But yeah, it is a little bit concerning with how that split's going to go. And I think at the moment, because I've got Naz, Philippou, and Flanders, it's already another St Kilda play on top of it with that early bye, because obviously we play your mob first up in round 0. So I guess it's one that, I'm not too sold on at the moment. But I guess if he has a majority of ruck time, then sure, go for it. But yeah, I think he's one to heavily watch in preseason, because he has come off a bit of an injury niggle as well. So he's one to definitely keep an eye on preseason. But before we move on the forward line, I'll throw 2 names at you, Nathan, because I guess they're in the same category and there's not too many things we can talk about ruckman. But yeah, 2 of them being Darcy Cameron and Luke Jackson. Both, more so Jackson than anything, probably a beneficiary gain, similarly to De Conning. And then D-Cam, it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on this one, considering that he's one of your mob. Both average pretty well. Jackson, we all know his capabilities of dominating when Darcy's not there. Darcy realistically never plays a season, but it just seems like every time we get a solid run of scores from from Jackson, Darcy pops his head in, and that kind of ruins Jackson a little bit. But D-Cam as well, averaged 111. He's uber consistent. But again, I think there's other options out there at 600 plus that you probably take ahead of Cam, and the fact of the matter is that he's got the early buy as well because he plays St Kilda. So, I don't know if that's just enough to go not worth it when there's Sherry and Gorn for not much more. But what are your thoughts on? I correct me if I'm wrong. I could be wrong because I don't know if you've got English as your one, but Jackson and De Conning, I could also see being a budget combo, considering both are your traditional athletic type ruckman that could really, really benefit from that rule.
Yeah, well, Jackson is my first ruckman, so I've got Jackson and De Conning at this stage. Yeah. I've heard Jackson is going to be a 6-foot midfielder, which if that's the case,
I did hear that as well.
Look out, because if he can get his athleticism, he's basically going to be unstoppable as a midfielder. Mm-hmm. They can run, and I don't know how tall he is, but if that's the case, get on. He could be Mark Blitzov's clone 2 and become a ruck midfielder, which I think Mark Blitzov's is the only player who's ever had that combination. I think Luke Jackson, if Sean Darcy stays fit, can become the second version of that. And he can also hold his own in the forward line. He's probably better as a midfielder than a forward. So look, I think at this stage, I think De Conning and Jackson are probably 2 of the more popular ruckmen. As for Donovan, can't knock the guy. Great ruckman. Unfortunately, I think the ruck rules, I think he's one that's going to be hurt by it because he doesn't mind a bit of a wrestle Darcy Cameron. So I think he's probably going to be one that is negated a little bit by it. And I think if there's probably only really one option for that sort of wrestle type ruckman, which is the big X Tristan Cherry. Otherwise, all the other big guys, I would probably say, are not worth it until we know more about this ruck rule and how it's going to, I guess, impact the ruck score. So I feel like Jackson and De Conning are probably the 2 most athletic ruckmen. So I feel like that's probably why they're quite popular. I've basically just avoided the entirety of those big lumbering ruckmen at this stage and gone the athletic ruckmen. Until I know more about how these ruck rules are going to impact the scoring.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I guess preseason will give you that data, but you save a lot of money if you go the cheaper route of the athletic ruckman and void Tristan Sherry and Gawn all together. But yeah, it's a tough one because Sherry, look, I think he's going to be the one that most people look at because he's not like Gawn who gets a huge amount of intercept marks and kicks and disposals. So Gawn kind of gets that off the ground, and Sherry's more your hit out to advantage and then tackle numbers once the ball hits the deck. So yeah, but Jackson, I didn't even think of that when putting this list together about him playing as another midfielder. And I think if that's the case, the whole issue around when Darcy was being picked was Jackson gets dumped full forward and then his score goes to shit. So the fact he's around the ball full time and has the case, I mean, they did it in patches last season. So I'll be, yeah, as I said, interested to see if he does it full time. But if he does have the tank to somehow go mid and then ruck, then who knows? That's a scary proposition because we all know how good he is as a pure ruckman. He can score 150s for fun. So yeah, one to definitely watch for next season. And I think, yeah, if you go and pick in him, you wouldn't doubt it at the moment unless we see some significant increase in time played by Darcy. But moving on to the forward line, as I said, we're trying to keep these episodes under an hour as best as we can. I know this one's maybe going a little bit longer just with the amount of players that we can talk to, but Cozzy Pickett is one that straight off the bat, I've got him as F2. I'm not sure. I don't remember when I saw your team, Nath, but if he's got him in your own classic side. But Cozzy Pickett, again, similarly to Rivers, has that conversation around does he benefit from the likes of Petrarca and Oliver leaving? Yes, he's played a lot of bulk minutes before last year in the mids, and then pushed forward and played other minutes in the pressure forward roles. Average 91, which is pretty solid, owned by 16%. I think for the reason of that being that there's now midfield spots available. What are your thoughts on Pickett? Because he's one that I've seen in a lot of sides, even sides that have decided to go him ahead of Sheasel to save cash, but do you reckon there is a lot of risk attached to Pickett, or do you think that because he ends up playing that midfield spot, hypothetically speaking, more often, that he's okay?
Well, I like midfielders who can kick goals, and Pickett is that player to a quintessential thing. I guess the only thing with Pickett is that last year he probably played more that midfield role. I just wonder this year if that's going to continue. By all reports, it is.
Yeah.
So if it does continue, he probably becomes a good option at sub 500k. At this stage, I have got two players ahead of him in my side. Obviously, one is Sheasel.
Yeah.
And the second one is Christian Petrarca at this stage. So you can't have them all. I don't mind the Pickett pick. Obviously, the fact that he's in 16% of teams probably means that a lot of people are thinking that he's going to sort of play a similar role to last year, which if that's the case, surely another preseason of training as a midfielder essentially will boost our average. But yeah, at this stage, I guess you can't have them all. At this stage, I've probably got Petrarca slightly ahead of him still, just with a proven track record of Petrarca. But I don't think you should be discounting Pickett by any chance.
Yeah. No, I think it was one that was brought up in conversation in one of the chats in Facebook as well. That I know one guy basically compared him to direct correlation to Petrarca and how that kind of links and who to pick. I think if you're directly looking at Pickett and Petrarca, you've got the benefit of Pickett not having the bye, as well as Petrarca. I have a gut feeling that he's going to play a lot more as that hybrid half forward role, rotating particularly with Touk Miller, mainly because Noah Anderson and Rao have not played anywhere near the half forward line before. Apparently, Noah Anderson was playing around half back in the match sim, but I'm not sure if that'll eventuate into the real season. But yeah, Petrarca I could see playing bulk minutes as a high half forward and then pushing with Miller because Miller's played that role before, whereas Pickett, I think, yes, there's a massive tag threat with him because he's by far and away the most dangerous midfielder. But I think they will need that type of midfielder in there because you look at Rivers didn't blow the highest and fired in the mids. Steele's your in and under midfielder, and Langford's your slower kind of more X factor role. But Pickett really gives you the dynamic and speed and pace along that midfield role. So I think you look at it that way, and all of a sudden Pickett looks like a solid pick. So I think he plays us first round. So be interesting to see if we do decide to tag him and then it goes all to shit when I picked him. But yeah, I think I'm going to stick with him at the moment just because I like him slightly better than Petrarca. But moving on to the next player that we've got is actually a key forward. I'm not sure if you've got him in your side. He's Sam Darcy, Nathan. He's kicked 8 goals in a practice game. Looks absolutely unreal. He's a key forward. I know the rule that we always say every bloody year in Supercoach, don't pick key forwards because they produce stinkers. But Darcy almost just seems to be the exception to this. Scores for fun with bulk goals. But also I think the benefit with him, he plays second ruck for the Dogs. What are your thoughts on this, Nathan? Because I guess he's one that he was similarly priced to like a Rankin last year where we had that conversation, he's going to fluctuate here and there anyway, so we're going to get him for cheaper. Is that the case with Darcy and him being a key forward? Or is there... like I guess the downside again, if you've got Petrarca in there as well, the Dogs now have an early season bye as well because they're playing opening round as well. So, what are your thoughts on Darcy? Is he an exception to the rule, or do you reckon you just stick fat with that rule of no key forwards at least for the opening couple fixtures?
There are rules, and there are exceptions to rules. This is an exception to the rule. There is always an exception we made for Lance Franklin. Because he could get up the ground. I think Sam Darcy is another exception to the rule, purely because of his height, and is basically like watching a significantly better version of Mason Cox, who can mark it, he can pass it off, he can play it as a ruckman, he can probably move up the field if he wanted to. He's got a fairly good engine. I can see why he's in 25% of clubs, because if you've got your own teammates saying that we basically can't do anything against him, then what does that mean for the rest of the competition? The only thing I will say, though, is that the Dogs' defensive line, especially key defenders, is very weak. As opposed to a lot of the other sides. So that perhaps does, I guess, bring him back slightly just because of that Dogs defender. Probably weren't playing full serious. But Sam Darcy is definitely an exception to the no key forward rule. I think probably by the end of the year, he will be in most sides. It's just a question of whether or not you can start him. I have floated myself with him at F2 with him and Petrarca have sort of been playing tag in and out of my side. At this stage, Petrarca's there, but I wouldn't be surprised if by round one I'd change things around a bit and Darcy comes in. But then there's also that early season bye that I've got to factor in as well. So you can't have them all. Probably a bit like the Pickett camp. I would probably have Darcy ahead of Pickett, to be honest. At this stage, I think he's probably the first choice. So at this stage, he's probably the second choice F2 for me.
I tend to agree. I think the only caveat is that the bye with him, and I guess. Look, I do agree. You got to pick him up at some point. The guy scores bags for fun, and I think it's inevitable, regardless of how much homework other opposition teams do. And GWS is no easy feat round ones or round zero. So, if you can get past that, then who knows? But I think there's also you got to be careful with these preseason reports because they say, Darcy looks amazing, kicked 8 goals. Yes, that's against the B-side defense, which isn't amazing, and especially the Dogs, who seriously lack height down there. But he's one that. I don't know, who knows whether teams start doubling up on him and know that, granted, maybe if he was 100K cheaper and then you almost like a breakout year for him, but he broke out last year, even the year before. So teams are definitely going to be wary of him because he is so much of their focal point. It's so much percentage of the ball goes down his throat. Like Norton's there is almost a decoy at times for Darcy. So, I think the only thing that I don't, I'm trying to get him in, but I like Pickett a lot, that he almost needs to be the third forward then Pickett, which I just can't afford. I think Darcy with the early season bye, probably I'll look at him post bye because at least he'll give me a sample size off the bat immediately of, hey, is he going to score these bags of fun? Is he playing second ruck? Does he get enough marks and disposals that when he doesn't score, say 3 to 4 goals, he doesn't does still score, say, an 80 plus, or 90 plus. So, yeah, he's a big watch over preseason. But moving on to another Swans player, which I was actually surprised was a forward eligible player, because I remember picking him a couple of years ago as a defender, which is Justin McInerney, playing a wing hybrid, pushing forward a lot of that run and gun through the midfield transition off Blakey's run. But 88.1, priced at 476, so slightly cheaper than Pickett. Are you entertaining him at all, also as the early season buy, or do you reckon it's something like, well, if you're picking him, you may as well pick it for 20K more, because McInerney isn't one that plays full-time mid, he's a winger. So I guess particularly with him as a transition winger, if he doesn't get the ball off his side, then he's just not a day for him, I guess.
Well, I think you had him, and I think he was out of your side by about round 6.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, that's about right.
There's definitely a red flag there.
Yeah,
I think if he was a halfback, I would say I would probably be more comfortable, but not as a winger. Wingers just, unfortunately, unless the ball goes out their side, they just don't score, or they have amazing athletic ability like Max Holmes does, or they can reinvent themselves, such as his partner in crime on the other wing in Ollie Dempsey, who was basically a key forward that played a wing role.
Yeah.
I don't think Justin McInerney's that type of player. So, I think it's probably going to be a watch list at best for me on McInerney, but I don't think I would consider him.
No, I mean, I don't think so either. I mean, I've got probably PTSD from picking him the first time around, so I don't think I'll go down that route again. But yeah, I think Blakey's going to take a bulk of that run and gun, I think, and McInerney probably has that transition into the forward 50. And McInerney, I've watched him live and just sprays the ball a lot. He's not the best kick in the world. He does kind of run and gun and kick for hope. And Sydney's forward line, I don't know, like it was terrible beforehand, and I think the likes of Kerno coming in is going to seriously straighten them up a lot. So I guess that might help his disposal efficiency actually kicking inside 50, but I could see that being a lot more beneficial to Blakey or even Gordon, who score already pretty well. McInerney, I think, I'd probably go to my sentiment beforehand that you probably pay 20K more or less and get Pickett in. But before we wrap it up, 2 more players left. I was, again, going to mention Petrarca, but I think we talked about him as well. I think, Nathan's in the camp picking him in, and I think for me, it's like, pick him in if you're not going Pickett or Darcy. I don't think you can afford to have Shees or Petrarca and then a Pickett or Darcy. I think you've got to go one or the other. He does a Gold Coast play West Coast first up, so he could go absolutely berserk first game Petrarca. But, I think the main beneficiary, if you want Petrarca, is this midfield time, and I don't think it'll quite be there at the Suns as much as people would like to hope so. But I could be wrong, so who knows. But moving to another Saints man who I had massive raps on when he came into the club is Max Hall. So this is down to 400K now, which is different territory. It's more probably closer to your mid-price than a cheap premium. He's never going to be picked highly. Look, I remember picking him up very, very late when I made my classic side, and we weren't even sure we were going to do podcasts at that point in 2025, and I picked him up super late in my team. Just made it because I was going overseas, and I made it on a whim. So, and Hall definitely impressed since then. He's just looks super, super clean as a midfielder. Every time he had the ball in our side in the middle 3, he was just so composed, would barely make a mistake. I guess over time his tank would weary, but what are your thoughts on Hall as an outsider and a neutral, knowing that you got obviously Flanders coming into the side, McRae's not leaving out of that midfield anytime soon, but Hall, what are your thoughts on him? Because, look, he obviously averaged around 75.1 where it was all said and done, but I remember he went on a 4 or 5 match tear. He was scoring 120s. What are your thoughts on Hall as well? Because, I guess if you're looking for value, he could be one that could be picked.
Yeah, well, I've just got up his scores now. So from round 16 to round 20, he went 120, 144, 89, 77, 102, which at 406K is probably a good thing for someone at that price who's capable of doing that. I think for him, unfortunately, I think it's just more going to be what type of impact those players who are coming in have, especially Flanders. What does that do to his midfield time? So Um, at this stage, he's probably a pass. I think he's probably too awkwardly priced as well at 400k.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're picking someone at 400k, it's basically the same discussion we had with the Trent Rivers and GF in the back line. You probably want them to average around that 90 mark, maybe a
Yeah.
bit less, given that they're in the forward line.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think I would probably watch list at best on Max Hall.
Yeah, I'd be the same. I think, as much as I'm an advocate for him, I think. Look, you've got Phillip, who is almost a lock at his price. Again, Flanders, Naz, Sinclair, to Connie. There's a lot of Saints players relevant this year, which is nice to know as a supporter that we're going up. But yeah, Hall is, I think, just based off the general makeup of our midfield, I think it will go based off a guess. Is Flanders locked in, Naz locked in, and then you're looking at a third midfielder, which could be any of Windy, Hall, McRae, Garcia, and then you got Boxall in there. So, it's a lot of players in that third to fourth mid rotation. So as much as Hall can present himself as a real valuable option, I think he's one that we rotated more frequently out into a half forward role. And then it's really dependent on how much ball he gets. And I think Flanders is one that's going to hurt his scoring, I think, from a SuperCoach perspective, because they're going to want the ball in his hands with how talented he has shown himself to be in that midfield. But before we wrap it up, we got one more player that was kind of requested to us by someone on Twitter. I forgot their handle, but I brought it up and they were pretty keen on it. But Connor McDonald from the Hawthorn Hawks, who averaged 70.4, and this was when I wrote him down. I was pretty disappointed with how he averaged his scoring. I'll look up his actual scoring breakdown in a minute, but he's one that always has kind of, for probably the last year or so, well, last 2 years realistically, since the Hawks bounced back, he's been one that everyone's gone, shit, this guy's going to be anything. Probably doesn't play those mid minutes that you want him to as a rotational forward. He's not a true mid. He's more of a hybrid forward that can score goals, and he scores goals very well. Priced at 381, so again, a step down from Hall. What are your thoughts on McDonald? Because, at the end of the day, he's a cheaper option, and it's for Hawthorn, who look pretty solid. And you've got the likes of Will Day out with injury, so you'd assume someone like McDonald might get some mid-minutes. But, yeah, that 70.4 doesn't look overly impressive as a forward option from last season.
This is a guy who I was alluding to earlier. I think he's first in line for that midfield spot at Hawthorn until Will Day comes back in. So based on that, at 300 at sub 400k, I guess the only problem is going to be whether or not he can do it for a whole season. But by all reports, he's worked a lot on his fitness over the preseason to sort of move into a more of a midfield role. Look, I think I'd be happy to wait on him just until he gets some scoring under his belt. I think I would have more faith picking Flanders for 15k more, who's done it before and basically just fell out of favour at his old club. So, yeah, it's an interesting one, McDonald. I definitely, think that he's probably first in line, but I probably need to see some scoring before I strongly considered it.
Yeah, no, I'd 100% see where he's positioned in the preseason matches, because just looking at his score on a Footy Wire, he's only had that 70 average is made up of 3 scores over 100, one of which was in round 1. Then not until round 14 where he scored 114, and then not until round 23 for 119. And then after that, he only had 4 scores around the 80 to 90 mark. So again, it's laced with risk. And I guess, look, if you pick him, then you're picking him with a bit of confidence. He's going to really shoot up into that 500k bracket, and you've made about 150k, so 120k at least. So, but yeah, I guess if you pick in that one spot where it's a 300k player, then Flanders is 100% it, because he's proven scorer. And for me at this point, I mean, we'll reveal our sides closer to round 0. But yeah, Sheasel, Pickett, Flanders, and then down to the rookies. So, just based off my makeup, I can't really fit anyone more than 200k in a spot, and McDonald really struggles that. And I don't know, he's one that I think you've got Josh Ward there ready to go, and